you a preview of what's going on with Daniel. So Daniel was taken captive by Babylon in 605 BC. This was actually before Ezekiel was a prophet. Like we've talked about before, the books of the Bible are not necessarily in chronological order. So Daniel actually happened before Ezekiel. And he was made a eunuch of King Nebuchadnezzar. Daniel was stripped of his country, his family, his home, his independence, his ability to have a wife, his ability to have children, and his future. As a young person, you are probably starting to think about what you will do in the future. When will I get married? How many children will I have? What job will I have? What house will I have, or where will I live? These possibilities were stolen from Daniel. He was a young man too, He was probably a teenager, and it seemed his life would be miserable. But Daniel did not let this hopelessness destroy his relationship with God. Through his life, Daniel glorified God. And we're going to start in chapter 1 of Daniel. We're going to read this first chapter, and then we're going to also read some in chapter 6. So there's two different events in Daniel's life that was recorded in this book. There's other things that happened in the book of Daniel, but these two are what we're going to talk about today. So in Daniel chapter 1, starting in verse 1, in the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, came Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, unto Jerusalem, and besieged it. He took it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, with part of the vessels of the house of God, which he carried into the land of Shinar to the house of his God. And he brought the vessels into the treasure house of his God. And the king spake unto Ashpenaz, the master of the eunuchs, that he should bring certain of the children of Israel, and of the king's seed, and of the princes, children in whom was no blemish, but well favored, and skillful in all wisdom, and cunning in knowledge, and understanding science, and such as had ability in them to stand in the king's palace, and whom they might teach the learning and the tongue of the Chaldeans. So the king of Babylon saying, I want you to go through all the people that was just captured, and I want you to pick out the best looking and the smartest of them, and that's who are going to be my eunuchs in my palace. And the king appointed them a daily provision of the king's meat, and of the wine which he drank, so nourishing them 3 years, that at the end thereof they might stand before the king. So the king of Babylon thinks that his diet is the best. So he's telling the overseers of the eunuchs, I want you to feed these slaves my food. So for 3 years they're nourished with my food, and at the end they'll be smarter and better looking for it. Now among these were of the children of Judah, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, unto whom the prince of the eunuchs gave names. So I don't know if you remember when we talked about Esther. Esther was her Persian name, but her Hebrew name was something else. It was No, it starts with an A or an H. I forget. So this was the same thing. Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were their Hebrew names, but they were given Persian names as well. So Daniel was given Belteshazzar, Hananiah was called Shadrach, Mishael was called Meshach, and Azariah was called Abednego. But Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with a portion of the king's meat, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the prince of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. Now God had brought Daniel into favor and tender love with the prince of the eunuchs. And the prince of the eunuchs said unto Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who hath appointed your meat and your drink. For why should he see your faces worse, liking the children which are of your sort? Then shall ye make me endanger my head to the king. Under the law given by God to Moses, the Jewish people were forbidden to eat certain meats like pork, or if they weren't prepared correctly, or if the meats were offered unto idols. The children of Israel were not allowed to eat it. This meat was considered unclean. And even though Daniel was in a foreign land, in a culture that did not follow God's laws, he still obeyed them himself. Daniel purposed in his heart that he would follow God no matter what. It's easier as a Jesus follower to resist temptation if you have thought through and purposed your convictions well before the temptations arise. Daniel and his friends made their decision to be faithful to the laws of God before they were faced with the king's diet. Food may seem a silly thing to stand for, but a commandment by God is life-changing, no matter how small it may seem to us. We're going to keep reading, verse 11. Then said Daniel to Melzar, whom the prince of the eunuchs had set over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, Prove thy servants, I beseech thee, 10 days, and let them give us pulse to eat and water to drink. Then, pulse is a vegetable soup. Then let our countenances be looked upon before thee, and the countenance of the children that eat of the portion of the king's meat. And as thou seest, deal with thy servants. So he consented to them in this matter, and proved them 10 days. And at the end of the 10 days, their countenances appeared fairer and fatter in flesh than all the children which should eat the portion of the king's meat. Thus Melzar took away the portion of their meat, and the wine that they should drink, and gave them pulse. As for these 4 children, God gave them knowledge and skill in all learning and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. Now at the end of these days that the king had said he should bring them in, then the prince of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar, and the king communed with them, and among them all was found none like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore stood they before the king. And in all matters of wisdom and understanding that the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and astrologers that were in all his realm. The caretakers of the eunuchs told Daniel that he needed to eat the meat and drink the wine that he was given, so that he wouldn't get in trouble with the king. But Daniel asked for 10 days to prove his faith. For 10 days, Daniel and his Hebrew friends ate nothing but vegetable soup and drank nothing but water. God proved Daniel's faithfulness, and at the end of the 10 days, Daniel had grown in muscle and handsomeness, and outproved the eunuchs who had eaten the meat and wine. Their caretaker witnessed what their faith could do, and allowed them to continue with their Hebrew diet for the rest of their time in Babylon. The king also noticed Daniel's greatness, and promoted him to president of the country. Daniel was preferred above all men, which caused others to be deathly jealous of him. The other leaders in the country created a scheme to trip up Daniel. They knew that every day he prayed to God 3 times, once in the morning, mid-afternoon, and at night. The leaders knew that Daniel would do this no matter what, so they created a law that no one could pray to anyone other than King Darius for 30 days. The trap was set. Now all they had to do was wait. Would Daniel still pray to God, even if it meant his death? So skip over to chapter 6 of Daniel, and we're going to read about what happens next in verse 10 through 16. Now when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, this was the law, saying you could only pray to King Darius, otherwise you would be killed. He went into his house, and his windows being open in his chamber toward Jerusalem, kneeled upon his knee 3 times a day and prayed, and gave thanks before his God, as he did aforetime. Then these men assembled and found Daniel praying and making supplication before his God. So I imagine Daniel goes into his house, his windows are open, he doesn't care who sees, so he's praying, and these guys come along and they're peeking in his window. They're like, look, he's doing it. Yes, we got it. And they run and tell the king, and then they came near and spake before the king concerning the king's decree. Hast thou not signed a decree that every man that shall ask a petition of any god or man within 30 days, save thee, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions? The king answered and said, the thing is true, according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which altereth not. Then answered they and said before the king, that Daniel, which is of the children of the captivity of Judah, regardeth not thee, O king, nor the decree that thou hast signed, but maketh his petition 3 times a day. He prays to somebody else 3 times a day. He's breaking the law. Then the king, when he heard these words, was sore displeased with himself. And he set his heart on Daniel to deliver him, and he labored until the going down of the sun to deliver him. So if you remember, the king chose Daniel. He loves Daniel. And now he's thinking, oh, no, I don't want Daniel to die. Is there anything I can do? Anything I can do? Then these men assembled unto the king and said unto the king, know, O king, that the law of the Medes and Persians is that no decree nor statute which the king established may be changed. So they're saying, you can't change this law, king. Daniel has to die. Then the king commanded, and they brought Daniel and cast him into the den of lions. Now the king spake and said unto Daniel, thy God whom thou servest continually, he will deliver thee. So Daniel's thrown into a pit full of lions. Now these lions weren't just any lions. They were probably starved to the point where any person, meat, anything else that would enter into their pit would be eaten up right away. That was their purpose, was to destroy. The king arose very early in the morning and went in haste into the lion's den. So all night the king's worried. What's happening to Daniel? He's probably eaten by now. I don't know. Maybe he's got For as much as before him innocency was found in me, and also before thee, O king, have I done no hurt. Then was the king exceedingly glad for him, and commanded that they should take Daniel up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no manner of hurt was found upon him, because he believed in his God. And the king commanded, and they brought those men which had accused Daniel, and cast them into the den of the lions, them, their children, and their wives. And the lions had the mastery of them, and brake all their bones in pieces, or ever they came at the bottom of the den. So they were eaten up before they even hit the floor. Then King Darius wrote unto all people, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, Peace be multiplied unto you. I make a decree that in every dominion of my kingdom men tremble and fear before the God of Daniel, for he is the living God and steadfast forever, and his kingdom that which shall not be destroyed, and his dominion shall be even unto the end. Why did God use Daniel? Daniel was faithful in the small things, what he ate, and he was faithful in the huge things, his prayer life. It didn't matter that he was living as a slave in another country with his body mutilated. He chose God above everything else. Daniel was so steadfast in his decision to follow God that he influenced the king of Babylon to write all the people and nations in all languages. Remember, so after the king of Babylon witnessed Daniel's faith, he sent out this decree to everyone across the earth that he could send it to. Peace be multiplied unto you. I make a decree that in every dominion of my kingdom men tremble and fear before the God of Daniel, for he is the living God and steadfast forever.
Wait, was he the king of the world?
Well, he was the king of the Babylonian Empire, which was dominating the world at this time. Can you imagine if you were so faithful that the President of the United States noticed it and sent out a decree over all of TV and internet and everything and said, Matthias's faith is so great that I know that his God is the real God. That's how faithful Daniel was. What do you think Daniel's superpower was? Matthias? Nope. It's similar. It's steadfastness. That was in our verse, saying that he was steadfast. How can you use the superpower of steadfastness? Just like the Babylonians.
Steadfastness. Looks like you added
I added a suffix to the word steadfast. Just like the Babylonians tried to change the thinking and practices of Daniel, our world today is trying to change how we believe. You can go to the best colleges, get the best job, live the best life, but it may not honor God. It is easier to resist temptation if you have thought through your convictions well before the temptation arises. Daniel and his friends made their decision to be steadfast to the laws of God before they were faced with the king's commandments. They had already made their choice, and they did not hesitate to stick with it. Sometimes when we get into trouble because we have not previously decided where to draw the line. Let's talk about an example. So one of the commandments found in the Old Testament is thou shalt have no other gods before me. So where do we draw that line? When we say, okay, I'm going to follow this commandment. This commandment literally means that nothing comes before God. So when you draw that line, are you choosing to pray and read your Bible before you do anything else? Because technically nothing else can come before God. Are you choosing to put God's will for your life before your dreams? Because technically God is supposed to come before everything else. So even, let's say your dream is to be a doctor, but God tells you to go be a missionary. Are you going to put him before your dreams? Are you choosing to worship God before, we can put anything here, soccer, football, volleyball, Fortnite, Minecraft, 4-H, FFA, you can put whatever you want in this blank. Are you putting God before blank? How steadfast will you be before such situations situations arise?